a Ukrainian oligarch who has been indicted for federal bribery charges, and he's resisting extradition at the moment. But he owns some jets, and Rudy Giuliani has flown on those private jets in the company of his currently indicted associates Lev Parnas and Igor Frum. Rudy Giuliani is on the news tonight a bit as he clarifies his remarks to CNN, because he previously lied and said he'd had nothing to do with Giuliani Firtash, and now he's trying to walk that back to a degree as best he can, whilst claiming to have never said the things he said in the first place. And Giuliani is asserting that he, yes, may have met Giuliani Firtash for a couple of hours, but he said he didn't count it because he didn't get any information that he deemed to be valuable. Blah, blah, excuses, blah, blah, lies. So lies to compound lies. Now, the interesting thing is, how is America holding up? How is America's judicial system holding up? Are we just watching things play out at a federal court level and going, yay, we have wins? We have federal judges like Ketanji Jackson arguing that Don McGahn has to testify. There's no such thing as ultimate executive privilege or supreme executive privilege. What's the term that the Trump administration uses and the Trump's Department of Justice uses? All of these places that Trump has corrupted that are now essentially grifting organizations that exist as if Trump is the center of the universe, and they no longer have a conscience or a guideline in terms of laws or the Constitution. They just have to keep making up excuses to defend Trump and to conceal his illegal conduct. So one thing that not many people talk about is the illegality of Trump putting a hold on aid that was duly appointed by Congress to benefit the US ally and to affirm America's significance as a superpower containing Russian military aggression, containing Vladimir Putin's expansion program of acquiring European countries that he is not entitled to violating the sovereign integrity of Ukraine and presumably more European countries if he gets away with that. So previously, the US wouldn't have allowed it to happen. The US wouldn't have sat quietly back and let Russia acquire more parts of Ukraine. Under the Obama administration, yes, they didn't give lethal military assistance because there was a concern at that time that the Russians or corrupt Ukrainians might hand over American military technology directly to Putin. But since then, the Department of Justice has twice signed off on handing military aid to Ukraine. Like, they've now made progress in fighting corruption. There was no longer a concern under the new government that they would pass on US military technology to Russia. So aid was approved, $391 million, and Trump circumvented legal processes for putting a hold on that aid. So he broke the law by not following House budget protocol for putting a presidential hold on something that had been signed into being or duly appointed by Congress. So there's two things Trump could have done to follow the law. He could have notified Congress that he wasn't comfortable releasing the aid, and they could have written some legislature. So there's two things: a rescission legislation and something else, which I'll go back to. The House Budget Committee tried to do a GIF thread about it, which was very entertaining, but didn't make the information stick in my head quite as well as it could have. In any case, I encourage people always to look these things up for themselves and to treat my podcasts or broadcasts as a jumping off point for verifying this information. My job is to pique interest in all of these things which are putting Americans in peril and people of the world in peril, so that the worldview of people is shook up, is challenged. Too many people nowadays are afraid of causing controversy, perhaps, or upsetting their nearest and dearest. Although at the same time, lots of Americans are upset and have upset their nearest and dearest by obstreperously supporting Trump and forming an emotional and psychological attachment to a view of Trump in which he is successful, and which he is a successful businessman, and all of their psychological processes have hardened, have calcified around promoting this man as someone with credentials for helping America succeed. Trump can't help himself succeed. He can help himself stay out of prison. He's been quite good at that. He's good at committing crimes, lying about it, suing his accusers, extorting and bribing people who try to expose him and his misconduct. This is over the decades of his business practices or mispractices. And he's great at talking his way out of trouble. He's not good at building a reputable business with a strong workforce, with successful patterns of return. Like, yes, money laundering will give you money over time, but it's not a successful business practice. It's a successful criminal operation. That's all. So Trump, in terms of having a legitimate business, he's no good. And your relatives may not be aware that Trump got a Kickstarter package from his father, which would count as $413 million in modern day currency. And he ran through that money. Imagine if you'd got $413 million, what kind of a business you might have been able to start. Trump started a lot of different businesses and bankrupted them. He bankrupted 2 casinos. He built them too closely together. They competed with each other. Maybe he didn't have as many money laundering clients as he needs. He bankrupted casinos. His business model is extravagance. His business model is to give the superficial impression of success and to draw in more suckers through that way. Trump is a businessman who knows to spend all of his money on a gold-trimmed suit to better win over suckers to buy his shoddy products. Trump understands that there will always be a market over idiots buying your snake oil if you say loudly enough, "Look at my beautiful suit, how successful I am because I sell this wonderful product." So if you're tempted to believe that someone's successful because they have the trappings of wealth, if you're tempted to believe that someone's products are good because they appear to have the trappings of wealth, then yes, you are ripe for being a sucker for Trump. And you are ripe for believing that tax cuts for the wealthy won't help kickstart an economic recession in the US. Typically, America goes into recession when Republicans land power or seize office in all branches of government. If they have a majority in the House and the Senate, as well as the office of the presidency, their goals and ambitions get taken off the leash, and they give tax cuts to their wealthy donor friends. And that leaves the middle and lower classes paying more, disproportionately more of the tax burden. And the tax burden exists not because taxation is theft, but because economies flourish when a strong tax base pays for things that benefit and strengthen a society and strengthen the collective economy. So when you had high marginal tax rates in previous generations, and the money from those billionaires helped to build America's highways and public hospitals and public schools and fire departments and police stations, that money strengthened America, made it law-abiding, made it easy to travel around, made it easier for trade to occur, and people to go to end labour bottlenecks and just to facilitate economic growth and development. So that pendulum has swung away, and billionaires have been paying less and less, contributing less and less to this tax base. And America's ability to maintain its infrastructure has been lessening. America's infrastructure has been crumbling. People remark on potholes, and still the libertarian liars will keep telling you that big government is inherently bad and private enterprise gets things done. Well, private enterprise has made a mockery of everybody's wish to have adequate access to healthcare in a non-anxiety producing way. Instead, Americans get intermittently delivered healthcare with a side order of anxiety. And doctors and nurses and health providers may tell you, don't worry, let's not talk about money now, let's just get you treatment that you need, and later on we'll work out an affordable care plan for your chemotherapy. And then a few months later, you're like, yep, here's your easy to pay back monthly plan of $7,000 a month for your in perpetuity for your $100,000 chemotherapy treatment that we told you not to worry about. So yes, there are inbuilt inefficiencies in America's healthcare system. That means people are paying too much money for something because privatization is not the be-all and end-all. And big government is not inherently bad. Big government helped America. So yes, it's in my interest to keep explaining this to Americans and to help pique people's interest in what's really going on in the US. Because if you're ignoring America's descent into totalitarianism, if you're ignoring Trump's tyrannical nature, the fact that he governs in the interests of his supporters to an extent, but wants to punish or undermine people, American voters who didn't vote for him. So he wants to cut off FEMA funding for California because California is a relatively blue state. Trump is not the president of America. Trump is the president of red states. That's who he governs for, and he is a product of flaws in your electoral college system, historic, racist initiated flaws, and he's also a product of racial divisions or bad worldviews in the US, diverted from reality worldviews in which people are content to blame black people and to vote for politicians who will initiate policies that hurt black people. And people will feel validated by that and ignore the fact that even if black people are getting hurt first, they too are ultimately getting hurt by Republican policies. For example, refusing Medicaid expansions. It's estimated 13,000 people died this year alone from an inability to access Medicaid as a consequence of Republican Party decisions, as a consequence of people voting for those who claim to have moral integrity, to want to support society and the fabric of society and to support families, but enact policies that harm families, harm women, etc. And this again is, to go even further back, is a product of people feeling like they don't want to lose power and they don't want to lose loyalty. So white churches that can see declining attendance rates, they want to claim their power. They want to be the alpha males in any given scenario to attract new followers. So they don't mind that Trump cooperated and coordinated with Russia, with WikiLeaks, etc. They just don't want enough people to believe that Trump did that, because they understand that if everybody realized Trump did that, then maybe Trump's support would shrink. But the hardcore Trump voters don't mind if he's a criminal, don't mind if he cooperated with Russia. Many strong Christian-minded people are amongst those who helped open the door for Russian attacks, ongoing significant attacks of American national sovereignty, American integrity, American democratic processes. So which evangelicals am I talking about? Mike Pompeo, who's a graduate of West Point, who's supposed to have a strong moral code, but who helped Rudy Giuliani lie about one of his employees, dedicated public servant, career professional Marie Yovanovitch, who was the ambassador to Ukraine, but who got ousted from that position because her integrity was a barrier to Rudy Giuliani's corrupt operations in Ukraine and his ability to help his friends and himself get signed up to a deal to put Trump supporters on the board of a Ukrainian gas company, Naftogaz, so they could peel off some of the profits for Trump supporting friends. The type of corruption that Giuliani accuses Hunter Biden of, or Joe Biden of, is part of the corruption that Rudy Giuliani was certainly and provably pursuing. Now, it's also been suggested that Trump could be trying to argue in his own defense that he legitimately was afraid of corruption in Ukraine. So we have to keep reminding people that yes, the Department of Defense had signed off on aid to Ukraine twice, that Trump does undermine the military by intervening in the case of a war criminal, Eddie Gallagher, whose own colleagues in the Navy SEALs tampered with the sights on his rifle to reduce his shooting accuracy because they had observed him aim for and shoot at civilians on more than one occasion. So they claimed he shot a 70 to 80-year-old man. They saw a red patch appear on the man's shirt as Eddie Gallagher sniped him with his rifle, that the old man fell and didn't get up again. That Eddie Gallagher aimed his weapon at some young girls, one of whom was wearing a flower hijab and who fell to the ground clutching her stomach after she was shot. And her friends helped her up over a small wall and helped her leave, so at least that girl could get up and run away. Not to say that she necessarily survived. We don't know if she could access medical care. We just know that Eddie Gallagher shot at a probable 13-year-old girl in Iraq, and that Trump intervened in all of the military justice proceedings, so that the only thing he was found guilty of was having posed with a dead body. But people don't necessarily know that the dead body he posed with was somebody who had been injured in a bombing. So was an ISIS combatant, but was injured, needed medical treatment, and Eddie Gallagher told his fellow Navy SEALs, "Nobody touch him. This one's for me." He then took out his own hunting knife and personally stabbed up that 22-year-old young man several times in the neck and threatened his colleagues in case they ever thought about telling on him. So made threats to their lives. They testified against Eddie Gallagher, and they were concerned of retaliation. Eddie wanted to publish their names in a Facebook group for Navy SEALs. So Trump, by intervening and saying, "No, I won't allow this man to be stripped of his trident, of his position in the Navy SEALs," even though he's been found guilty of posing with the dead body of an enemy combatant, which is against their rules. He then got the Defense Secretary, Mike Esper, to fire a Navy secretary who had objected to the president's actions in intervening to save the position, the title, the salary of this war criminal whose own co-fighters, whose own colleagues testified against him that they had specifically messed with his scope, with his target scope on his rifle, to reduce his shooting accuracy because they knew he would kill more civilians, or they'd seen him do it and were predicting that he would snipe down and kill more Iraqi civilians who weren't engaged in conflict, that he would just hunt people. That's the kind of person who Trump is saying he wants to campaign with him. That's the type of obliviousness that people have when they're in a cult and they are clinging to their false beliefs. And this process some psychologists refer to as the psychology of accommodation. You don't want to admit having done something wrong, so you keep accepting more and more lies, more and more untruths, in order to construct a protective, emotionally protective wall of rationalizations for yourself that you can hide your fragile ego behind, so you don't have to admit having done the wrong thing and voted in a tyrant who is jeopardizing America's national security and the global world order. He's jeopardizing stability in Asia because he currently, the cost of having US troops stationed in South Korea as a deterrent to North Korean military intervention was borne 50% by the US and 50% by South Korea. Trump wanted to just suddenly change that to bill them for $500 million. And they are like, why? Why is he sabotaging this relationship? Why is he cutting us off in this way? And they're forced to sign an agreement instead with China. Well, Trump is a bit of a puppet of Putin, as many of us know. And of course, it's Putin's agenda to destabilize the world and benefit from that reorganizing of the world order, to undermine America's status as a world order that helps to keep the peace. So it's Putin's aim to expose us all to danger, and Trump is just, the screen seemed to freeze for a minute. I don't know how long it froze for. I was talking about Trump reducing stability in the Asian region by giving South Korea a bill, an incredibly disproportionate bill for US troops being stationed in South Korea. So Trump is basically a manifestation of all the disgruntled, poorly thought out and conceived opinions of the right in the US. People who think, yep, world stability is no big deal. the people who always argue, regardless of what you propose for America, always say, well, we have veterans with problems and homeless people in the street. And it's like, yes, that the underservice, the under-catering to veterans, perhaps that should be part of the billions and billions of dollars apportioned to the military budget. Perhaps the military budget should include the veterans budget for taking care of veterans so that there's less wastage in the Pentagon. All of these crazy contractual agreements in which America might pay $50 for a small metal screw because those relationships have become really exploitative and under-audited. So we've learnt from Trump that things that are not monitored are things that can be exploited and often are exploited by corrupt people and grifters, etc. Yes. So I hope this has been interesting. I'm going to go, and thanks for your time and attention. I hope if anything I said has piqued your interest, that you go and further research it. Conservatives are causing the downfall of society, so it's not really responsible anymore to proudly say you're a conservative. The right thing to do, the responsible thing to do, is to go and research some of those opinions, not to just get caught up emotionally in a culture war that they tell you to be afraid of, that they tell you, Thanksgiving is going to be renamed something or Christmas is under attack. You need to pay attention to the real threats. You need to step up and be a responsible adult and look at the imminent risk to human civilization from rapidly escalating climate change. That scientists are pointing out we've reached various tipping points where natural feedback loops are activated. So the world has warmed by 1 degree Celsius already. So certain thawed territory is unthawing, which is releasing methane, a very potent greenhouse gas, more potent than carbon dioxide, into the atmosphere. And we are still not taking significant collective action, such as saying, yep, plane flights deliver greenhouse gases specifically to a level in the atmosphere that creates more of this warming effect, that has these gases that have the property of letting through heat from the sun and not releasing all of it. So not all of it bounces back. Too much of it is now being retained in our atmosphere, which is thawing the ground in various areas, melting ice, which is exposing dark areas of ocean that then also trap more heat instead of reflecting that heat back out. Boing! Back out into the stratosphere away from Earth. We are keeping more of that heat here, and it's going to change all manner of things about the world's weather and the world's climate. So we're all suffering. People in Bangladesh are certainly suffering from exacerbated floods. It's just exacerbating all manner of natural weather events that are no longer natural because they have this added factor now of huge amounts of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere emitted as a consequence of human industrial activity. So not all countries are equally responsible for this industrial activity. The ones that are, the US, Australia, etc., which have high per capita emissions levels, we are not being responsible adults. We are acting like criminals who are hunkering down with their crimes and don't want to admit that they're wrong. But that's not the only story, because people who are responsible, who are aware, and who make the effort to stay informed about these issues are starting to get quite noisy, and children are starting to get quite noisy, and children can't readily be accused of hypocrisy. You can't say, oh well, children, you've spent years flying in planes. Children don't make those choices about what to do. Adults make them for children, and if children are now saying it's not worth it for us to keep going on holidays overseas or living in a society where such things are encouraged and readily available, if we don't have a tenable future, if we don't have a civilization to look forward to where all the things we're preparing ourselves for, professions, getting a job in finance, are not viable if coastal cities are underwater, are not viable if responsible adults didn't act when there was still a window of opportunity to take significant, sustained, concentrated action. Thanks for listening. I hope you look this up for yourselves.